What's the most unique or unusual way you've seen someone earn a living? Story 1. I have a client, I'm a CFP, who inherited some money from his grandmother. About $150K. He's in his 20s, so I was certain he'd blow it all. Sure enough, he comes in and says he needs the cash for a business opportunity that he and a guy are starting. He's a real Chad-type guy. Lives in South Beach, parties, says bro every other word. So basically, I stereotype this situation as another one that's going to blow their inheritance and will be broke within the year. Guy pleads to keep his account open, swears up and down he's going to put this money back. I obliged. Months go by and I see an alert that a money wire has come into his account, $150K, so I'm pleasantly surprised that he held his word and put it back. Next month, $250K, another $250K, then another. In our business, we have a regulation that we must discuss with the client about how the funds are being deposited and where they originate. It's part of the U.S. Patriot Act. So I call the guy. Turns out he and another friend went down to Miami and used all his inheritance to buy Ferraris, Lamborghinis, etc. All these exotic sports cars. But here's the catch. They're all hurricane cars. None of them work. They've all been flooded and insurance totaled them. What they do is buy these exotic vehicles that don't work and polish them up. Put them on a wrecker and drive them to people's houses and drop them off for 4 hours. Turns out there's a huge demand for wannabe influencers to take pictures with exotic cars. He charges $1,000 and you get 4 hours with the vehicle in your driveway to take as many videos and pictures as you want. After that, he loads it on the back of his wrecker and takes it somewhere else. The last I spoke with him, they had bought a salvaged jet and were in the midst of redoing it. His entire business model will revolve around people giving over hard-earned cash so they can look cool on the internet. Blows my mind. But at least he's doing well financially. Story 2. I remember a guy in Berlin who sold stuffed animal holidays. People from America would pay him and send him their stuffed animals, and he would take them on a tour of Berlin in a little old Soviet-era car and take pictures of them along the way. In the end, he would send the stuffed animal back to his owner, including the pictures of his trip. Story 3. I knew a barber who lived and worked out of an RV. He'd drive into a town, find a parking lot near a busy spot, and get permission to stay there. He had charisma for days, and had Lenny Kravitz-level style, but was also a super mild and kind person. He'd work when he wanted to and always had a line. People accepted that he didn't keep regular hours or appointments. Apparently, he had done this for years. Once he got bored in a location, he'd take off and find a new city. He was easily top 5 coolest people I've ever met. Story 4. I remember chatting to an older guy who mentioned that he made his money from his YouTube channel. It was around 12 years ago, so I didn't even know you could make money from YouTube. He told me about his videos, how he repairs household appliances and lots of people watch. I looked him up that evening, and he had a huge following. I watched a few of his videos, and he would get a broken appliance and attempt to repair it. He didn't really know what he was doing, and half the time he couldn't even fix it, but people loved him. He would take it to bits and say, I wonder what would happen if I put a screwdriver in there, or say that little part looks burnt. Let's just hit it with a hammer and see. I just looked him up again, and there is no sign of him. Edit, a few people asking for the channel details, not sure I should give that. I can't find any trace of him anymore. I don't remember the channel name, only his name. He took it quite seriously, and I would cause him offense since I've said he didn't really know what he was doing. Story 5. The Bristol Museum car park attendant. Used to sit in a little booth and collect the parking fees for the local council. Worked there for years. One day he didn't turn up to work. After a few days, the regulars got worried and called the council to see if he was okay. Turns out the car park for the museum was free, and the council had no idea anyone was charging for it. This guy had collected parking money for years, set up his own booth, then disappeared. Story 6. Maybe not crazy weird, but I recorded sound effects for game and movie studios for many years, and still do from time to time. Pretty much every sound you hear in a film or TV show is recreated by sound designers. I supplied their raw materials, lots of traveling to point microphones at everything from obscure one-off historical artifacts to everyday objects like doors or cabinets. If you've watched shows like The Office and Mr. Robot, you've heard some of my work. Story 7. My cousin lives in NYC and works for a company that maintains corporate rooftop beehives. Companies that own skyscrapers want the earth-friendly image of having bees on the roof, but they obviously don't want to do it themselves, so my cousin does it. She's not rich or anything, but makes a comfortable living in a big city doing something pretty unique. Story 8. I bake fruitcakes from scratch, using pecans instead of walnuts, and cream sherry in lieu of harsher liquors. I use 1/2-pound loaf pans, so no one is stuck with a lot of leftovers. Baking begins in September through October, so the cakes have time to soak up the sherry. Business is pretty good. I can do a few $100s or more easily, and still have folks clamoring for more. Story 9. Selling fake poker money for real cash. I had a roommate about 15 years ago who'd play online poker on Facebook, becoming quiet good at it. He would sometimes chat to other players and get to know them. Some were well off but addicted to gambling. They'd beg him to set up a game so that he'll lose some fake millions to them to gain some levels, and they'd send him real money for that. Please, will you lose 20 million for me? I lost it all and am still on beginner level. Tomorrow evening at 9. Okay, that would be €200. And he'd set up a lot of games. Managed to live a whole year by these profits. Even finance a trip abroad with his GF. For some people he felt petty and tried to convince them to quit. For others there was no mercy. At some point his GF dumped him and his morale dropped, so he lost everything and even tried to buy some fake money with his own real money to get back in the game. Fortunately realized that this was a really bad choice and quit altogether. Story 10. There's a guy near Sedona who goes out every once in a great while and collects a few buckets of dirt, takes it home and has his kids separated into different sizes of sand/pebbles/rocks, puts it in little packages and sells it to model train/mini whatever enthusiasts. Story 11. Through a friend in London, I know a guy who makes a living doing gold leaf painting. He's hugely in demand for stately homes as it's a dying profession. A few years ago, he was working for the Queen in Windsor Castle, and he ended up getting arrested by the cops. He parked his van outside the castle and refused to move it when asked to by a policeman because he needed to get all his equipment inside the castle. He told him he was working for the Queen doing gold leaf painting and showed him his permit, but the copper didn't buy it, and he arrested him there and then. Don't fuck with the cops in Windsor was the general message he got. After he got out of the police cell, he went home for the day and was having pints in his local pub by lunchtime, telling everyone about his day going from Windsor Castle to a police cell. He still charged the Queen for his full working day, she ending up paying for him to be arrested and him losing a day's work to paint her ceilings with gold leaves. Story 12. I worked with a guy who had a number of pilot's licenses. He'd had a job working for an insurance company, stealing planes from the FBI. Literally, planes owned by drug cartels that had been impounded by the FBI and then claimed on. If for whatever reason the insurer had ended up paying out for the claim. I have no idea what scenario might cause that, but apparently it happened, and they'd fly this guy over the compound, drop him in by parachute, and he'd steal the plane back. That was quite unique. Story 13. Saw a program years ago about a pair of dudes that made a living as basically private security traps for casinos in Vegas. Basically, the first dude was a lanky, nerdy-looking guy who would make himself look like an ideal victim. He would act drunk, flash some cash, and basically make it clear he was worth mugging. He wore a wire, so that when he was getting attacked, the details would get relayed to his partner. Said partner was a hulking ex-Marine who was built like a fucking freight train. Since they wanted to get guys arrested, they needed to wait until they'd actually laid hands on the first guy. But as soon as they did, this guy would charge out from somewhere nearby and just flatten the mugger before subduing him and calling the police. Seemed like a fun gig for the second guy. Less so for the first, who basically got paid to get beat up on a regular basis. When an interviewer asked him, while he was sporting some bruises from his latest encounter, about whether he enjoyed his job or not, he just shrugged and said, "It's a living." Story 14. I lived in a city where Public Works had a position of driver. He did not work on site. He just waited and watched. He did not gas up the truck. He did not clean or repair the truck. He just drove the truck the 2 or 4 times a day that it needed to be driven. Because of the union, the city was required to maintain the role. It was very sought after, and apparently the senior guys did a lot of jostling to be the next to perform this arduous job. It was a holdover from a period where very few workers knew how to operate the trucks of the day. My understanding is that they used to have a well-paid position of farrier, horse hoof specialist, that took 20 years to eliminate after the city got rid of its last horse. Story 15. Back in the 80s, I answered a personal ad that turned out to be from a guy who made his living as a dinosaur illustrator. I talked to him on the phone and decided to pass. He came across a bit pompous and went on at some length about how answering machines actually slow the flow of communication. To be fair, I was pretty ambivalent about dating in the first place, and mostly went through the motions to try to feel normal. In the early 2000s, I visited Dinosaur Depot in Cannon City, CO. One of the postcards I bought there turned out to be his ILO, and just a week or so ago I saw him quoted in the media, IIRC praising the authenticity of something or another. He's basically famous in certain circles. Story 16. I know of two people who made great livings in bizarre ways. One guy runs a company that contracts to install hand sanitizer, soap, paper towel, and toilet paper dispensers in large businesses like hospitals and schools. Apparently, these companies will contract with a supplier, i.e. Lysol, for their products, and the supplier will provide the dispensers for free. Each supplier has a proprietary dispenser, apparently. His company goes in and does the installs. He got into it by stumbling his way into a sales job for one of the suppliers and then realizing there was a hole in the market for someone to do the installs. The other one made it big during COVID. Similarly, had been in a sales-type business and saw the writing on the wall about online shopping. Went in with one of his clients and opened a corrugation production facility, probably the richest guy I've ever met personally, and he made it from cardboard boxes. Story 17. I'm surprised I haven't seen anyone mention the companies that have people stand in line for you. I saw one on a TV show once. Guy had lost his job and agreed to wait in line for an iPhone or shoes or something for his friend in exchange for $20. He quickly realized some people would pay good money to receive limited goods without camping in front of a store overnight, so he started a business. Story 18. Many years ago, I encountered a guy who made his living setting up warehouses for a nationwide furniture chain. The guy was about 60. And he traveled the country, with his wife, visiting the store's locations, spending about a week at each location, making sure that the warehouse was functioning properly, providing some training, and performing a small process audit. He was good at what he did, and clearly enjoyed the work. He told me that he got paid very well, and ate a steak dinner every night, which he expensed to the company. He stayed in good hotels, and his wife spent her days exploring local malls and craft stores. Honestly, it still seems like about the best job I can think of. Story 19 guy I know makes about $80K/wire untaxed begging on the street in Seattle. He is a walking museum of lies. His clothing is a costume to look like a stranded commuter and includes eyeglasses. He isn't a commuter and doesn't need glasses. His sign reads something to the effect of stranded and need a couple bucks to get home. He's been standing in the streets in this city for more than a decade. It's a very convincing performance for an audience of fools. Story 20. A kook who used to inhabit some of the groups I read made his living sending bills to celebrities for psychic dream auditing. He would go to sleep thinking of them and, he believed, use his psychic abilities to help them in his dreams. A fair number of the bills were paid. If they didn't pay, he'd send them a letter saying he was discontinuing his services and pick another celebrity. Apparently, the accountants for some of the celebrities would get the invoices, see that it was both an amount too small to bother the celebrity with, and possibly something they'd ordered and just paid them. I considered going into that business because he made good money, but since I don't actually believe in it, it would be fraud if I did it, while the kook actually did believe he was performing a service. Story 21. In college, I take a class on how to start and run a small business. Prof tells us to think of ridiculous business models for our fictitious businesses, as we will get more out of the class that way. Stupid ideas ensue: selling paper clips door to door, refilling car gasoline tanks in people's driveways, service to read and summarize the newspaper to executives, etc. One classmate decides he is going to sell tumbleweed. Guess who quits college and started a successful business? Tumbleweed guy. Takes a van to the desert, collects tumbleweed and sells them to Hollywood movie and TV studios who need them. Keeps the tumbleweed in a warehouse, and since they never spoil, his only costs are gasoline, storage, and a website. He eventually becomes the #1 tumbleweed provider to studios around the world, shipping tumbleweed globally. Made a heap of money selling what millions of people drive by and ignore every year. Story 22. Pretty tame compared to most of these, but I used to own a cat sitting company. I was a veterinary technician, and it made me sad when people would board their cats at the hospital. No matter how nice the environment was or how kind we were to the cats, they were always stressed out. So I offered to go to people's houses and care for their cats. After doing it as a side hustle for a number of years, I decided to quit my full-time job and focus solely on cat sitting. Because of my medical training and education, I was able to monitor cats with complicated medical conditions and administer treatments. I eventually hired staff to take off some of the burden. I've met a lot of pet sitters and dog walkers, but never someone who only took care of cats. People were always surprised when I told them I was a full-time cat sitter. Story 23. In my memory, I have seen many unique or unusual ways of making a living, but one real case impressed me the most. The protagonist of the story is a woman named Emily, not her real name, who makes a living by helping people collect and organize the relics of their deceased relatives. Emily has been interested in history and old things since she was a child. She likes to read stories about the past and visit museums and antique shops. When she grew up, she became a historian specializing in local history. However, in an accident, Emily lost her closest grandmother. When sorting out her grandmother's relics, she found that it was a process full of memories and emotions. She realized that many people would feel overwhelmed with their relics after losing their loved ones and didn't know what to do with them. So Emily decided to use her expertise and love of history to help others sort out their relics. She founded a company called Memory Keeper to provide services for those who need help dealing with the relics of their loved ones. Emily's job is not easy. She needs to communicate with customers carefully and patiently to understand their needs and feelings. She also helps clients sort and categorize their belongings and provides them with advice on how to store and dispose of them. With Emily's help, many clients are able to better remember their loved ones and gradually move on from grief. Her work has also been recognized by the community, and she is often invited to participate in speeches and seminars to share her experience and advice. Story 24. We have a few palletitties in our area. They go around and collect wooden pallets from behind businesses and such, repair them and resell them. I was once having a big party and we had a stack of pallets piled up to burn for the bonfire, and this palletite comes down the road and stops dead in the road with his pallet pickup and just sits there for several minutes. We were too far away to see his face, but it was pretty funny. Story 25. He's retired now, but I have a friend who used to hang paintings for a living. It was just him, and he said he could undercut companies because he did the fabrication for the lighting and whatever else was involved in hanging art. He hung art for Madonna, Shaq, Cher, and other celebrities as well. I have no clue how much he made per hour or how much people in that profession make, but he has a nice house, not a mansion or anything, in the Hollywood Hills. What was interesting to me was that he'd drive around in a beat-up white van with ladders and tools strapped all around it. So just by looks, one would think he was a maintenance guy or something.